Sun Tzu's knowledge of war is a contemplation of war's influence and its force in shaping the political landscape of the world. Such importance makes it essential in the quest to understand the nature of humanity, and analyzing certain aspects gives specific insights into the relations and connections across all of mankind. The art of defense is a key component, and armor was the primary defense for most civilizations. Armor suited the valiant warriors who fought to retain stability in battle, but it extended its importance to impact other aspects of culture as well.
Three major civilizations that utilized armor effectively were the Imperial Romans, the Japanese during the Tokugawa period, and the medieval Europeans. When analyzing the passings of the following civilizations, it is easy to see the extraordinary impact of armor on economy, religion, and politics. The culture of these civilizations also affected the portrayal and relevance of armor, which shaped its specific relation with each culture and allowed them to have differences with how the armor was a part of their culture. By studying the particular changes or similarities in armor, a greater picture of humanity can be drawn.
The primary way armor influenced civilizations was through its political use. Armor was created to protect soldiers in battle, and using it as a primary form of defense was a major advantage against many fatal attacks. In addition, the head of a society may further want to extend his borders if he is confident that he has many protected soldiers to take with him on the fields of war.
Armor was further able to impact the economies of societies as such important defense created a necessity to have jobs suited to making it. In most cases, blacksmiths were created specifically for armor making, and the mass production of armor then affected war strategy. When blacksmiths were not used, slaves did the labor like all other jobs. As an effect, individuals were not defeated as easily, and thus the needs of an army were increased to accommodate for larger groups of people due to great win rates. The cost of supporting these in large groupings of soldiers and armor stabilized the economy because the currency constantly rotated to afford the prices.
Finally, religious symbols often dotted the armor of many soldiers to provide guidance from the spirits above. Furthermore, this display enabled it to influence the religion in literature, as oftentimes armor was able to be a factor in detailing religion. However, armor was even used to suppress the spreading of certain beliefs, which went against the principles of a nation. These three factors of a civilization display the range of armor's influence and how important it is to societies. This can explain many tensions and elaborate on differences by careful analysis, allowing historians to find out more on humanity's efforts and why events played out the way they did. When people use the term armor, the first image which often comes to mind is of a knight in shining armor. In medieval Europe, this commonly known form of armor was utilized to protect the soldiers on the battlefield. Contrary to fictional representations, the plain armor associated with this image of a knight was a rare sight on the battlefield because the task of creating such extravagant protection was both timely and expensive. As such, the medieval armor was initially completely based around chainmail armor, which was many small chain links attached forming a mail. The archaic level of armor provided solid protection initially, but it had quick wear, which made it weak.
The history of the chain armor predates the Roman Empire as it was standardized in the late Republic around the 3rd century BCE. It was comprised of 30,000 linked iron chains and was done through slave labor. The lorica segmenta was a 4-piece set of armor made of iron, which had 2 sections of shoulder and torso fastened together with leather. Similar to medieval Europe, this armor was not very present in the battlefield due to its requiring months of labor and how easily the steel rusted, but nevertheless was created in fabrique or arms factory by the legionaries themselves without slave labor.
During the Heian period, traditional samurai armor was created. Before that, samurai were usually archers on top of horses. This traditional armor was made from leather or iron scales, and then these scales were woven together by leather and silk. In addition to that, the armor was lacquered to weatherproof it against harsh conditions. In the 16th century, Japan began trade with the Europeans, and in 1543, Portuguese introduced the matchlock musket. Japanese armor makers now made new armor and bulletproof armors with steel or iron plates for protection against musket fire. The armor of the samurai contained various parts: the do, which was the chest plate; sode, the shoulder protection; kote, protective glove-like gauntlets; sonayate, thigh and shin guards; and the kabuto, which was a stylized helmet that often contained religious symbols of status. Like the lorica segmentata and the plate armor used by medieval European knights, samurai armor required months and sometimes even years of construction to build. Samurai armor was a genius piece of protection as it was relatively light and it was easy to perform dynamic actions in them, as they had a hinged cuirass and all their pieces were sewn together.
In history, many times armor has been a decisive factor in determining the victor in wars. Examples such as the Battle of Troy and the Crusades display the importance of armor and how it can affect the outcomes of conflicts, and even the entire battle. The influence of armor in the political aspect of the world can be seen through the three civilizations, each one showing how armor could impact the outcomes of battle and influence the relations between countries. Medieval Europe's political environment was greatly impacted by armor. Between the 11th and 15th centuries, there were more than 200 notable conflicts, both internal and external. Each one of these wars was impacted by armor, as the major influences on armor were nearly universal in terms of war. The armor's significance correlated with the make of it compared to the weapon it was defending against, which ultimately determined its usefulness. For medieval armor specifically, mail armor, which was much more common due to its cheaper cost, was not primarily strong. It was mainly used for foot soldiers as it specialized in defending against melee weapons, specifically swords. In medieval times, swords were often blunt, and the idea was to strike to create a heavy impact and break bones rather than to puncture and cut. Mail provided a respectively effective defense against it, and it was used well in the early medieval ages as bows, arrows, and cavalry had not been developed yet. This mainly affected the battles of the early medieval ages, but since it was much more universal, the impacts were minimal. However, the development of bows and arrows sparked the creation of the heavily useful plate armor. Bows and arrows were specifically puncture weapons, and while chainmail was helpful for spreading and nullifying blunt strikes, it was terribly ineffective against any puncture weapons, such as spears, arrows, and bolts. The shield the warrior carried could only do so much, and some didn't carry one at all. The reaction to this was to create a sheet of armor impervious to punctures and blows, which was known as plate armor. Plate armor was a great advantage as it was impervious to blunt strikes, sword slashes, spear thrusts, and many arrow punctures. This enabled the warrior to be virtually invincible, and was much stronger and able to withstand much more of battle than a warrior armed with mail. Also, plate armor was useful for arming horses as well, which introduced the deadly cavalry to the European battlefields. Cavalry has proven to be a deadly instrument of warfare, and has been the focal point of many victories, Europe being no exception. The strength of plate armor was significant in war, especially when considering how much it could be used. It was much more expensive than mail, and only the very rich could afford to arm their entire army, or afford even a significant amount of the powerful plate armor for their soldiers. Also, creating plate armor required a good infrastructure, so only a limited group were able to attain it. Those groups had a significant advantage in battle, and it was utilized among Western European armies during the 100 Years' War and the Italian Wars. Ottoman Turkey also had a strong idea of its usefulness, and used it effectively to build its empire.
Like any other civilization which has surfaced on the planet, protection is key to a stance in the world. To simply put it, if there are unprotected individuals warring against those covered in impenetrable clothing, the win shall go to the latter. Similarly, armor has had great influence in Rome in terms of how it caused more expansion due to the confidence in victory, was affected and changed according to influences or reforms, and eventually had a major part in the society's fall itself. The Roman Empire was a direct continuation of the Republic when the Constitution did not seem to apply any longer, and was created in 27 BCE by its first emperor Augustus Caesar, although many argue that it really began with the dictatorship of Julius Caesar. The importance of this all is that the Lorica Hamata remains relevant even through the new phase of empire. The inspiration for the chainmail itself was drawn from the Irish Celts in 3rd century BCE after the conflicts they had with the Roman Republic. Once within the Age of Empire, the government had created a well-known split between the types of individuals in the army. Emperor Tiberius was the individual who was credited with the first allocation of the armor when technology advanced. There were the 5,000 heavy infantry citizen legionaries, a smaller amount of non-citizen fighters of Rome known as the Auxilia, and finally, the lower foreign mercenary, Numia. Clearly, the division caused by the governing body affected armor along the terms of what was supplied. The more favored legionaries were given the new technology, the compact Lorica segmentata, due to its bulky nature, whereas the other two classes used the less expensive mail armor. The political action of Tiberius was a major change in armor to include social hierarchy in a way, although the better armor did not seem to be the most comfortable. In Tiberius's case, he affected the use and distribution of armor. For people like Nero, the power given by the armor to his guard and militia, Christians could be easily persecuted and punished efficiently, and thus the religion would not spread that easily. Following the murder of Emperor Commodus in 192 Common Era, Rome sprung into civil conflict between the years of 192 Common Era and 197 Common Era, which saw the height of the use of the segmented armor, because the five men Pertinax, Didius Julianus, Niger, Albanus, and finally Severus fought to become the emperor of Rome. Septimus Severus especially used the gear in order to wage war against Albanus and Niger, and he infamously purged their followers to assert his ascension as the Senate's leader. However, right after, the armor seemed to fall out of society as it seemed too uncomfortable to wear and not necessarily expensive to make. So eventually, Emperor Diocletian put the chain armor in favor as per his reforms, which included the dividing of the East and Western Rome. Even with the constant advances in metallurgy, Rome was unable to combat what eventually came to it: destruction. The foreign nomads got stronger, which was not helped by the fact that a uniformity in armor was long gone. Eventually, the military was unable to stand up to Odoacer in 476 Common Era, and Western Rome was sacked because of it after the final emperor Romulus stepped down.
Similar to medieval Europe and Rome, armor in feudal Japanese society provided protection against melee and long-range attacks, which was a decisive factor in determining the confidence level of the soldiers. The confidence and the morale of the soldiers, especially samurai in this particular scenario, changed the course of Japanese history, as the soldiers and an army's bravery often decided the battle's victor, along with other factors such as military tactics and environment. The importance of armor is exemplified in the crucial Japanese battles of Ichinotani, Minatogawa, Nagashino, Sendaigawa, and Sekigahara, the battle in which Tokugawa Ieyasu defeated his enemies. Most of these battles occurred in the Sengoku Jidai, era of the Warring States, during which different clans of feudal Japan fought each other for complete supremacy. During the Sengoku Jidai, clan leaders such as Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu used personal armies that employed several samurais. Each of these samurai were given proper samurai armor for protection against arrows and the newly introduced matchlock muskets. Apart from providing protection during monumental battles, the Japanese armor also provided protection for the samurai outside of the battlefield. From very early in Japanese history, Shogun, the military ruler, had more power than the Emperor of Japan. Minamoto Yoritomo, the first shogun of Japan, founded the Kamakura shogunate, in which the shogun exercised control over Japan while giving the emperor comfortable accommodations in accordance with Shintoist beliefs. After the Sengoku Jidai, Tokugawa Ieyasu became the shogun and started the Edo period, during which there was relative peace and uniformity. During the Edo period, the samurai didn't need to fight as often, as there was little to no conflict in Japan, except for the occasional peasant rebellions. Yet, the absence of conflict did not undermine the importance of armor, as the shogun, the samurai, and other important political figures still wore their armor for defense against assassinations. Armor was a big aspect of a samurai's life in his prime. Traditionally, a daimyo, a local landlord, hired samurais as mercenaries to fight in his army for expansion of his territory. Daimyos held great power over his region, and everything from devising military strategies to organizing the division of food surpluses was devised by the daimyo from his castle. The relationship between a daimyo and a samurai was one of give and take. The samurai would pledge his support in times of turmoil and war in exchange for land from the daimyo. The daimyos displayed loyalty to the shogun, and in the Edo period, the daimyo had to follow the alternate attendant, a system with his army. Moreover, a shogun was a samurai himself and relied on the superior Japanese armor technology to protect himself from the assassinations and peasant revolts. Japanese armor was very expensive to make, So many middle-class warriors used armor passed down from their ancestors, while lower-class samurai used cheaper and lower-quality armor. Finally, the armor worn by the samurai gave the samurai some political power, as armor, along with the samurai's values and strength, was the instrumental factor in determining the samurai's rank in the political society. The samurai held considerable political power due to their connection with the local daimyos and the shogun, and their ownership of land given to them by the daimyo. Moreover, some samurai would go on to become daimyos and shoguns. Thus, due to the importance of armor in the battlefield and outside the battlefield, armor was a crucial means for the samurai to gain political power and change the political and militaristic history of Japan.
Politically, armor was very important to determine the outcomes of war, as it was the primary form of defense. However, analysis of the similarities and differences show ideas and concepts about humanity that from other points of view may not be able to be seen. One example of this is the confidence that it gave to the warrior, and although this was a fact, it shows how armor was a firm defensive artifact throughout time, a concept that is shown to be true even to today. Humanity's need to feel safe is related to great accomplishments, and armor's influence on this showed that there is lots of room to study the brain when dealing with armor, and how it reacts when faced with different situations. So, armor's ability to protect the body was correlative to humanity's fear of death, and how much value they put on protecting it. Plus, its impact on wars shows the importance of wars in society, and how much they can shape it. By impacting the wars, armor was able to show humanity's craving for greatness, to take the importance of war, and show how people were willing to do whatever it takes to win, and were willing to invest so much time in creating advantages in battle was armor's great achievement. It was an instrument designed to give an advantage in battle, which perfectly shows humanity's desire for conquest and victory, which can again be narrowed down to the ultimate human urge, to attain greatness, whatever it may be.
Armor's strong influence through the political landscape was only possible through its effect on the economy. A common theme presented through the majority of the civilizations was a specialized workforce dedicated to producing armor, as its political impact increased its importance. This integration of armor had a sizable impact, as some places began to specialize in manufacturing armor.
The medieval blacksmith was an important figure in the European culture. While providing a source of armor and labor, they were also able to increase the relevance of their craft through the ever-increasing need of armor in society. It was common for a blacksmith to work for a knight or group of knights and provide them with quality arms. An increased need for soldiers prompted an increased need for blacksmiths, which in the conflict-riddled Middle Ages meant the blacksmith craft was strengthened due to the political importance of armor. As armor furthered the smithing industry, it also was able to give it respect, as the required skill to make quality armor, combined with its obvious importance, gave those who could create it an esteemed position in the eyes of society. During Charlemagne's reign, he praised blacksmiths as he was able to see the value of armor, and therefore gave the position lots of respect. The art of making armor was so important to medieval society that it even affected how the blacksmiths were brought up. They were commonly employed from a young age and developed their skill with a teacher. The importance they gave to learning the craft shows the influence of armor in their society, as they heavily emphasized the importance of keeping the craft pure. Also, armor influenced what weapons the blacksmith created. Because they worked for warriors, they often traveled with them if they needed to alter the armor, which gave them lots of feedback on the quality of both the weapons and the armor. The fact that the blacksmiths were employed enabled the armor and weapons to both improve, as they each worked to undermine the other's weaknesses. The smith was then able to form new technologies based on his feedback and further the craft and the economy. Another important aspect of armor was its cost. The cost of armor is important because it displays both the importance of armor and the effect it had on the economy, along with how expensive it was. For a cheap suit of armor, one would have to pay £3, which for a man-at-arms was around 60 days of work. For the average suit, it was around £6 to £8, which correlated to 120 to 160 days' wages for a man-at-arms. Finally, a finely made, custom suit of armor cost at least £20, or over 400 days' wages for a man-at-arms. Custom suits of armor were better fitting and enabled the user to more freedom of movement and protection, which were necessary in battle and provided a strong advantage. This explains why richer countries were more successful in wars, as the better suits of armor were more costly, and armor was an important figure in determining the outcome of battles. Quality armor was often bought by the knights themselves, as the ones the nobles supplied were worse than the ones they could get for themselves. Finally, some regions of Europe were able to focus their economy on armor and mass produce it. Armor was mass produced in Milan, and there it was known to be very high quality. Other places that armor had a major hold on the economy were in Germany and the Lower Countries, which were Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. The prosperity of this industry brought immense infrastructural sophistication to the area, which improved the quality of living for the residents, wherever armor was mass produced.
During the expansive Roman Empire, armor was required to suit the valiant troops who were in the fields of war and taking part in defending it. Despite the obvious use on the battlefield, the two armors had great effect on the economy of the empire. The great need for iron and other materials to make the Lorica Hamata and the Lorica Segmentata caused major expeditions into different lands in order to gain those required materials. In addition, slave trade boomed with the need for more specialized labor in order to create the more intricate mail armor, but the segmentata was created by the legionaries themselves in smiting factories known as the fabricae, and thus became exclusive to the legionaries, while mail was received as usage for the auxilia and numeri. Since Rome required heaps of armor to cover tons of warriors, the empire took on armor as one of its biggest aspects of economy. Armor, like it must, allowed for the preservation of Roman treasures from the conquests of the foreign world, which allowed for an increase in the trade and manufacturing of other goods. Labor in Rome, for any task in fact, constituted of slave labor by groups of prisoners of war. Rarely were there any individuals who had jobs to perform manual tasks, unlike nearly every other civilization. Because of this, society seemed to lack a middle class and was primarily slaves and citizens in all work aspects. The same carries forward for the practice of smiting armor to be used to defend. Lorica Hamata was a complex piece of armor constructed with 30,000 iron chains linked together in order to provide flexibility, comfort, but more importantly, protection against weaponry. Because it took 2 months to create one chainmail shirt, Rome required a method to create many of these to supply their troops in the 100,000s. Unlike other societies, however, Rome found it best not to establish a new class of blacksmiths, but instead trained the thousands of slaves they already possessed in state-run armories, which fed directly into the auxilia camps. With this process of hamata transport, the economy was successful in circulating protection. The Lorica Segmentata was a completely different story when it came to labor. Between the 2nd century to the 4th century, legionaries, which were Roman citizens of heavy infantry, received blacksmith training as per their regular combat tactics. The reason being was that they were responsible for creating and repairing the armor in their factories, which were extensions of camp. The plate armor was much more protective and stable than the mail, but would easily rust and resulted in very high maintenance after major conflicts. A warrior was expected to know the knacks of repairing their armor even in the field of war, because what often happened was the disconnecting of its fine leather straps which held the 2 shoulder guards to the torso. Although the Lorica Segmentata did not have the same labor effect on the economy as its chainmail counterpart, it still contributed to the fact that Rome did not have a blacksmith or specialized economy during their culture, as slaves did their bidding in all physical aspects. In places like the Roman Empire with definitive military constructs and soldiers, the economy usually revolved around the materials being used to create the armored pieces. Because the chainmail armor predated the Roman Empire, it not only used iron but also the material of bronze. Due to the further need to obtain resources for the armor, large-scale mining expeditions throughout the Iberian Peninsula took place, as the area was not only rich in copper, tin, and iron, which were used for the armor, but also gold, silver, lead, and mercury. The Lorica Segmentata is an armor split into 4 sections to enable easy storage. There were 2 shoulder sections and 2 for the torso, with leather fasteners to keep the iron and steel together. What this meant was more mining in Iberia later into the 2nd century, but also an increased hunting of sheep, lambs, goats, and pigs to receive the valuable leather to hold the pieces together. highly suited individuals guarding all sides of the empire, Rome was able to keep domestic prosperity, but also foreign. At the height of the empire, the Romans had great trade with France, Spain, and North Africa from a domestic perspective. In the same way, the Silk Road carried on with greater success because of larger military zones. The economy was made simple because only one Roman currency was used due to the years of peace creating standardization. Thus, when Rome collapsed, so did the trade around it because it made up a majority. From the trade, the economy was introduced to imported goods such as beef, corn, glassware, iron, lead, leather, marble, olive oil, perfumes, purple dye, silk, silver, spices, timber, tin, and wine. Based upon the previously stated reasons, armor influenced economy in Rome by forcing slaves to smite, causing expeditions and a reliance on materials used to make the pieces, and increased trade due to the economic peace and prosperity brought on by effective armor. Based on the previously stated reasons, armor influenced economy in Rome by forcing slaves to smite, causing expeditions and a reliance on materials used to make the pieces, and increased trade due to economic peace and prosperity brought on by the effective armor.
The economy of feudal Japan was also profoundly impacted by the armor worn by the samurai. Primarily, samurai armor greatly increased the employment of the Japanese people, which would augment the local economies of the daimyo. Along with that, Japanese armor also encouraged international trade between Japan, China, and Korea, which further enlarged the economy of Japan. Moreover, Japanese armor displayed the social status of the samurai, and only the higher class samurai and the political leaders contained the high quality armor. Firstly, in order to create the armor, laborers employed by the daimyo had to gather the basic materials such as leather and iron. So, laborers had to work in mines in order to get iron ores that would be the primary substance in giving the armor its defensive capabilities. Moreover, laborers had to mine for gold, silver, and other precious stones for the construction of expensive armor for a higher class samurai. Due to the abundance of wars and battles throughout all of Japan, the need for armor increased, so numerous laborers were required for the construction of armor. Hunters were also required to gather leather for straps that would connect the individual pieces of armor. After the base materials had been gathered for the construction of armor by the laborers, the blacksmiths welded the materials to make the various parts of the armor in addition to the weapons used by the samurai. In earlier times, samurai armor was often made from wood, as advanced iron metallurgy wasn't available to them. Yet, most of the armor that survives today is made from steel. Thus, most of the effective new armor, Tosei Gosoku, required extensive work from the blacksmith. Many times, there would be numerous blacksmiths working together to make the armor. As for example, one blacksmith would make the shoulder pads, while the other would make the chest plate. Hence, like laborers, blacksmiths had to be paid by the daimyo for the extensive work they put into making the armor for the samurai, which resulted in economic organization and an increase in the income made by the economy itself. Once the blacksmiths and the laborers had done their part in the manufacturing of armor, the craftsmen had to compile all of the pieces and decorate them. Like the blacksmiths, several craftsmen work on the single armor at once, and several craftsmen had mastered one specific part of the armor. For instance, some craftsmen work exclusively on applying lacquer, sap from the lacquer tree applied on top of wood and metals to increase their durability, and some craftsmen would work on creating leather scales and strips. Then, some craftsmen work on adorning the armor with decorations and artistic patterns. Samurai armor was built over long periods of time as it required extensive and meticulous work. It required steady work over many months to complete more than 100 silk strands for just one suit of armor. Along with increasing employment, armor also allowed means of trade between Japan, Korea, and China. During the Yamato period, Japan had close ties with the Gai Confederacy in Korea, as the Gai had access to large quantities of iron ores, which they exported to Japan for the construction of iron armor and weapons. Also, even though there were silk makers in Japan, it is possible that the Japanese traded with the Chinese for silk, as silk allowed them to bind together the individual pieces of their armor. Thus, samurai armor greatly augmented the economy of feudal Japan by increasing international trade and by requiring the employment of numerous laborers, blacksmiths, and craftsmen.
The Middle Ages made medieval Europe a very Christian-based society, and their devotion to their religion was prominent in much of their culture. Thus, it makes sense that it was able to carry the influence to armor through how it was decorated and used in literature. Armor was also able to further the Christian roots by emphasizing the fundamental beliefs and strengthening them as well. This is done by decorating the armor with symbols of Christianity, and evidence that this was done is abundant. Often the shields or breastplates had crosses on them or sometimes images of Jesus or Mary, who were important biblical figures. The figure displayed on the armor was a reminder of who one fought for, so the theological imagery displays the Christian faith while also allowing the connection and devotion to grow. As it became common to devote the fighting to God, the popularity and strength of Christianity was able to increase. Furthermore, the armor's political importance was able to influence the religious landscape of the world. Oftentimes, as the Europeans spread their reign into other territories, they were able to bring the religion with them. Notably, the Crusades were an example of how armor's political impact enabled the spread of religion. When the Holy Land, or Israel, fell under Muslim control, the Latin Church got angry and sent an army in an attempt to recapture the land. Armor was able to influence these battles through the technological advantage and the allowance of cavalry, as it did with any other conflict. However, these battles highlighted the importance, as the differences in the quality of the armor was often the difference that determined the outcome, especially in the beginning Crusades. The strong chainmail and plate armor of the Crusaders was able to defeat the leather and less armored opposition. The armor's importance was solidified when the Crusaders initially took back the Holy Land, as the armor aided them in their quest. This trend was emphasized in other areas, but the Crusade provides an easy and complete example of how armor's political influence allowed religion to be spread. Armor's relation to the knight allowed for the knight to become a religious figure and the Christian faith to be portrayed as a factor of the knight through his armor. Miles Christianus is a Christian allegory that displays the meaning of Christianity through armor. It consists of a knight wearing the armor of God, which was a physical representation of armor worn by God, often alluded to in works of art or literature as a way to connect armor and knights to Christianity. The armor of God in Miles Christianus also portray knights' influence and representation in religion, by emphasizing how it was used to elaborate on the teachings, as the Christian values were blended with the knightly code of chivalry and connected the honor of a knight to the church. This created the correlation between honor and religion, and was able to further the understanding of religion by connecting it to a knight. The connection to armor comes from the knight's dependence on his armor, and how it makes him the strong warrior that he is. The armor made the knight honored and respected, which was able to allow him to affect the religion. Armor was also used as a representation of Christian beliefs through the imagery and symbolism that the armor represents. Similar to Miles Christianus, the armor's religious significance created the ability for the knight to represent Christianity in literature as well as ideology. An example of this is in the ancient literary epic Beowulf. Here Beowulf is depicted as wearing armor with the Christian symbolism, such as a picture of Mary, Jesus' mother, or a picture of a cross on his shield or armor. In addition, the enemies that Beowulf is fighting are considered enemies of God, so by wearing his religious armor he is reflecting the concept of honoring God and fighting for the sake of protecting Christianity and the Church's values.
Although the Roman Empire contained sects of Jews and Christians, paganistic gods and representations were used in the army, which acted as honor and identifications. In addition, the same armor had a large impact on the Abrahamic religions themselves because it was used to suppress their spread during the periods in which the emperor was seen as the only divine. The representations usually found themselves on the lorica segmentata of the legionaries and were the eagle, the man-headed ox, the horse, and the boar. When such seal was held by a legionary, it signified honor and they were thus to be respected. Eventually, however, all of the animals became part of the ultimate eagle, Aquila, which was an animal form of the ancient Roman god Jupiter and was especially present on the battlefield. Each legion contained a highly respected individual right below the centurion who was the Aquilopher, and their job was to hold the Aquila standard like a staff to add Jupiter's grace by their side. They were expected to hold it through the fighting and proudly bring it back. Losing the Aquila was a sign of disgrace and misfortune for the legion, so the holder was highly protected. Unlike the Middle Ages, when Christianity and the Catholic Church had a firm grip on armor, or when Zen Buddhism and Shintoism affected samurai armor, Roman armor did not contain those characteristics due to imperial worship, but they still held signs of paganism. When there is a society so bent on making the emperor the illustrious one, or essentially a god, problems arise when monotheistic faiths such as Christianity and Judaism come to challenge the common beliefs. As seen with the First Jewish-Roman War from 66 to 73 Common Era, the Romans who used the Lorica Segmentata and the Hamata to destroy the Jewish towns in Judea. During the 12th year of Nero's rule, there were an anti-taxation protest which led to the Romans destroying the Second Temple of Jerusalem and the forced arrests of many citizens. This led to the infamous Battle of Beth Horon in 66 CE, when an entire legion of 6,000 Romans were massacred by the Judean infantry. However, the Romans did not let that loss just stay, as seen with the siege of Masada. From 73 to 74 Common Era in Masada, Israel, the Romans, donned in Hamata and Segmentata, built ramps to surround the 960 Jewish zealots who sought refuge. General Silva led the Roman legion Exfratensis of 15,000 men and women when they finally completed the battering ram. The final wall was broken, but they did not find a single living soul when they reached the top because of mass suicide. Ever since then, the Jews are reminded of that day and how it must never occur again.
In the armor of the samurai, several religious symbols from Shintoism and Zen Buddhism were depicted, such as family patron gods and famed bodhisattvas, a person who has achieved nirvana but remains on earth to guide others. In the cuirasses of some armor, fantastic beasts such as dragons, wolves, and lions were also depicted, hence possibly alluding to Shintoism. Along with the depiction of fierce beasts, several religious figures were also depicted on the armor. For example, this Japanese breastplate illustrates the figure of Achala, a Buddhist deity who wields a sword and a rope and radiates fire. The rope held in his left hand points to his ability to rein in evil or round up the evildoers frightened by his sword. Achala is shown running through waves, a common way of referring to his protective powers, as legend has it that returning from a journey to China, the ship carrying Kukai, a Buddhist monk, was caught in a storm. After appealing to a statue of Achala for protection, Kukai was rewarded with the vision of the angry god attacking the waves with a sword, calming the storm and saving the ship and its passengers. Hence, religious figures were portrayed on the cuirasses, as the samurai thought that they could obtain extra safety from the Buddha and other Buddhist deities. Likewise, many samurais also followed Shintoism, the traditional religion of Japan. In Shintoism, the adherents worship in shrines of kamis, natural spirits, that are marked by torii gates, and often, Shinto shrines are placed in areas with a beautiful environment. A samurai's helmet, kabuto, displayed his status, and sometimes the kabuto also depicted Shinto religious symbols. For example, the hollyhock plant is a plant that is prominently featured in festivals held at the Shintoist Kama Shrine in Kyoto, and the double-leaf version acts as an insignia. A samurai's kabuto contains a double-leaf version of the hollyhock, which will be worn by a Shintoist priest or be symbolized as an insignia. Also, this particular kabuto was glazed with double layers of red and black lacquer and is meticulously crafted, further displaying the social status of the priest, who is most likely a samurai. Since, during the Edo period, samurai had no job on the battlefield, most of the samurai were forced to give up their militaristic attitudes and adopt different jobs. So, some samurai became priests and others became authors or politicians, as along with fighting practice, samurais had gained a proper education and were supposed to follow the 8 rules of Bushido. Thus, it can be clearly seen that armor was greatly impacted by the religions of feudal Japan, which were primarily Shintoism and Zen Buddhism. Many fantastic beasts, such as dragons, bulls, wolves, and lions, were depicted on armored chest plates from Shintoism. Shinto religious symbols, such as the double-leaved hollyhock flower, were also depicted on the kabuto worn by priests. Finally, protective deities from Zen Buddhism were also depicted on armor, as the samurai thought that these figures would provide more protection for the warrior. As previously stated, armor provides a look onto society that many may not have considered, but further study of the influences could be a gateway to increasing our understanding of the world today. Armor provides a look at the world from a conflict-based point of view, which is unique compared to many other things. It also allows for insights on how important the environment is to determining the culture of a region, and allows us to see the true impact of war as it is a part of many different aspects of culture. Furthermore, today the importance of war is very present in society, and many of the aspects of armor, such as its influence in wars and how it provides for the workforce, are still existent in the modern world. Understanding the history of armor leads to a better understanding of the conflict based ideology of humanity, which can be used to introduce countless forms of discussion and debate.